In 1877, one American family was richer than the United States government. When Cornelius Vanderbilt died that year, he left behind $105 million. That was more money than the entire U.S. Treasury was holding at the time. One family, richer than the country it lived in. The largest fortune in American history had completely vanished in less than 100 years. No war took it. No stock market crash erased it. The family did it to themselves, and the way they did it is a warning for every person who has ever dreamed of leaving something behind for their children. This is the story of how the House of Vanderbilt fell. Let me tell you up front exactly what happened, because the details are even stranger than the headline. Cornelius Vanderbilt built a fortune worth, in today's money, somewhere north of $200 billion. His son doubled it. And then his grandchildren, the third generation, spent it on the most spectacular houses, parties, and titles the country had ever seen, while almost none of them earned a single dollar of new money. Within 30 years of the old man's death, no Vanderbilt was on the list of richest Americans. Within 70, the great houses were being torn down or handed away because the family could no longer afford to heat them. There's an old American saying for this: shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The first generation works in shirt sleeves and builds the fortune. The second generation enjoys it. The third generation, who never knew the work, loses it. The Vanderbilts are the most extreme example of that proverb in American history. So let's start where every fortune starts, with one person and one decision. Cornelius Vanderbilt was born in 1794 on Staten Island, into a family that had nothing. He hated school. He left it at 11, and at 16 years old, he borrowed $100 from his mother to buy a small flat-bottomed sailboat so he could ferry passengers and freight between Staten Island and Manhattan. That is the entire origin of the largest fortune America would ever produce. 100 borrowed dollars and a boat. He was relentless in a way that frightened the men around him. He undercut every competitor's price until they either sold out to him or went broke. He moved from sailboats to steamships, and the nickname stuck for life: the Commodore. By the 1850s, he ran steamship lines that reached all the way to California and Nicaragua. And then, in his 60s, an age when most men in that era were already dead, he did the boldest thing of his life. He sold off his ships and bet everything on a newer technology: the railroad. He bought up and stitched together the rail lines running into New York City, created the New York Central System, and built Grand Central Depot, the ancestor of the Grand Central Terminal that still stands in Manhattan today. Here's the detail that tells you who he really was. The Commodore didn't spend. He didn't collect art. He didn't throw parties. He lived by the standards of his wealth almost simply, and he poured nearly everything back into the business. He understood something his descendants never would. A fortune is not a pile of money you sit on. It's a machine that has to keep producing. When he died in 1877, that machine had produced $105 million. To understand that number, remember the federal government itself was holding less. He was, by the share of the entire American economy he controlled, very likely the second richest American who has ever lived. And almost all of it, about 95%, he left to a single person, his son, William Henry, because the Commodore had one fear about his fortune. He believed that if he split it up among all his children, it would be scattered and destroyed. So he kept it together and handed it to the one son he trusted to grow it. For exactly one generation, that bet paid off. William Henry Vanderbilt was already in his 50s when he inherited. Everyone assumed the quiet son would slowly lose what his father built. He did the opposite. In just 8 years, William Henry nearly doubled the fortune to almost $200 million, making him, for a brief moment, the richest man on planet Earth. He's the one who gave us the phrase that would haunt the family. When a reporter asked whether he ran his railroads for the benefit of the public, he snapped, "The public be damned." 3 words that captured exactly how the Gilded Age rich saw everyone beneath them. But William Henry died in 1885, only 8 years after his father. And this is the hinge of the entire story, because William Henry did not do what his father did. He did not leave the fortune to one heir to keep the machine whole. He split it. Large fortunes to many children. Now sit with what that means. The Commodore's golden rule had been, keep it together, keep it working. In a single generation, that rule was gone. The money stopped being one powerful machine and became dozens of enormous private allowances. And the grandchildren who received those allowances had a very different idea of what a Vanderbilt was for. Their grandfather built. Their father grew. They would spend on a scale the world had never witnessed. The third generation did not go into shipping or railroads. They went into society, and they competed with each other to build the most magnificent houses in America. On 5th Avenue in New York, they built a row of palaces so grand, the press called one of them the Triple Palace. Alva Vanderbilt built a French chateau on 5th Avenue, and then threw a costume ball in 1883 that cost, in today's money, roughly $6 million for a single night. Then they discovered Newport, Rhode Island, and turned a seaside town into a competition of mansions they insisted on calling summer cottages. William K. Vanderbilt built Marble House, 50 rooms, a staff of 36, and a price tag that in today's dollars approaches $300 million. His brother Cornelius II answered with The Breakers, 70 rooms, modeled on an Italian palace, used for a few weeks each summer. And then came the masterpiece and the warning. George Washington Vanderbilt II went down to the mountains of North Carolina and built Biltmore. To this day, the largest private house in America, 250 rooms, 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms at a time when most Americans had none, 65 fireplaces. It cost around $6 million in the 1890s, and it sat on 125,000 acres. Here is the part the postcards never mention. Biltmore was a money pit from the day it opened. It produced almost no income and devoured a fortune just to maintain. George was eventually forced to sell off tens of thousands of acres of his land to the federal government, simply to keep the lights on. The grandest house in America was quietly bankrupting the grandson who built it. And the spending wasn't only in stone, it was in people. In 1895, Alva Vanderbilt decided her daughter, Consuelo, would not marry the American man she loved. She would marry a title. Alva forced 18-year-old Consuelo to marry the 9th Duke of Marlborough, an English aristocrat who needed cash to save his crumbling ancestral palace, Blenheim. Consuelo later said she was locked in her room until she gave in, and that she cried behind her wedding veil. The price of that title? A dowry of around $2.5 million in railroad stock, plus a guaranteed income for the Duke for life. On their honeymoon, he reportedly told her he had only married her to save his estate, and that he had given up the woman he actually loved. The Vanderbilts had so much money, they were now spending it to buy European titles for unhappy daughters. That is what a fortune looks like. At the exact moment it stops being a machine and becomes pure decoration. Now, I want to be careful here. because it's easy to turn this into a simple story about spoiled rich kids. The truth is more useful than that. The Vanderbilt fortune didn't collapse for one reason. It collapsed for four. And they're the same four that destroy family fortunes today. First, they split the money instead of keeping it working, so it fractured into smaller and smaller pieces with each generation. Second, they moved everything into things that cost money instead of things that made money. Mansions, not businesses. Third, they never reinvested. The Commodore's machine was sold for parts and spent. And fourth, the railroads themselves, the source of all of it, slowly declined as cars and planes arrived, and no Vanderbilt was building the next great thing. No single villain, no betrayal, just a fortune that stopped producing and started performing, and a family that confused looking rich with being rich. That distinction is the whole lesson, and it has nothing to do with how many zeros you have. The end came faster than anyone believed possible. Within 30 years of the Commodore's death, no member of the family was among the richest people in America. The great Fifth Avenue palaces, the ones that had cost fortunes, were torn down one after another because no one could afford to keep them. They were worth more as empty lots than as the most famous houses in New York. The Breakers and Marble House were eventually handed to a preservation society. Biltmore survived only by turning itself into a tourist attraction. You can buy a ticket and walk through it today. The houses outlived the money. And then, 1973, 120 descendants of the richest man in America gathered for a reunion. Not one of them was a millionaire. One of them wrote a book about it, Arthur T. Vanderbilt II, and he called it Fortune's Children, The Fall of the House of Vanderbilt. A member of the family, documenting how his own family lost the greatest fortune the country had ever produced. So is this just an old story about old money? No, because the pattern is running right now in millions of ordinary families. Researchers who study wealthy families have found that roughly 70% of family wealth is gone by the end of the second generation, and around 90% by the end of the third. The Vanderbilts didn't break the rule. They are the rule, written in marble. And here's the ending almost nobody expects. The Vanderbilt name did survive, but not through inherited money. Cornelius Vanderbilt's great-great-great-granddaughter was the designer Gloria Vanderbilt, who rebuilt a fortune of her own from her own work. And her son is the journalist Anderson Cooper, who has said plainly that there was no trust fund waiting for him, and that he believes inheriting money is, in his words, an initiative killer. The family that proved a fortune can vanish in 3 generations also proved the only thing that lasts is the willingness to build it yourself. The Commodore knew that. He started with 100 borrowed dollars and a boat. Everything after him was spent. Everything he was, he made. If a fortune larger than the United States government could disappear this completely, the question isn't how the Vanderbilts lost it. The question is what you're building that can actually last. Subscribe to Lost Fortunes, where we dig up the fortunes history buried and the lessons that got buried with them.